When I first set eyes on Maple Blossom Estates, I believed I had found my suburban idol. My name is Jonathan Shepard, and after decades of working my way through emergency services and disaster preparedness roles, I finally saved enough to buy a spacious ranch-style home with an expansive backyard. After years of renting cramped apartments in major cities, moving wherever disaster management agencies posted me, I craved the stillness of a quieter life. Tucked amid broad oak trees and manicured hedges, Maple Blossom Estates was one of those neighborhoods with squeaky clean sidewalks, neatly painted fences, and an unspoken competition for best-kept lawn. From the moment I moved in, neighbors waved. Families strolled with dogs on leashes each evening. Kids rode bikes and shouted to one another beneath the golden glow of streetlights. It was picturesque, bordering on storybook. But as I unpacked my boxes, setting up furniture in my new house, I became aware of an undercurrent. Neighbors would sometimes lower their voices and mention the HOA, Homeowners Association, with a mix of pride and trepidation. Proud, because the HOA maintained the neighborhood's near-flawless appearance, but also fearful, because rumor had it their enforcement methods could be relentless. And one name in particular stood out in whispered tones: Bryony Adler, though most privately dubbed her Karen. At the time, I shrugged it off as typical suburban lore. After all, I was confident I knew how to handle crises. I was the director of the State Disaster Management Agency, recently appointed after years of experience coordinating large-scale emergency responses. Surely, I thought, a single HOA board member, no matter how meddlesome, wouldn't pose a problem that dwarfed tornado recovery or widespread flood rescues. Little did I know, Karen was about to unleash a man-made catastrophe that would rock the foundation of Maple Blossom Estates, physically and morally. I encountered Bryony Karen Adler for the first time on a warm Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed across my driveway as I kneeled by a row of petunias in my front yard. I was transplanting them from pots, determined to transform my yard into a lush haven of greenery and color. "That's a lovely arrangement," came a crisp voice behind me. Startled, I rose to see a woman in her early 50s. She had meticulously styled hair, pressed khaki slacks, and a pastel cardigan draped over her shoulders. She held a clipboard tucked beneath her left arm, a pen protruding from her breast pocket. "Thank you," I replied, wiping soil from my fingertips. "Just moved in a couple of weeks ago. Finally settling." "I'm Bryony Adler," she said with practiced politeness, though her smile felt a bit rigid. "On the HOA board. I like to greet our new residents. We have certain guidelines about yard decor, plant species, and landscaping details. Nothing too restrictive, of course, but we do maintain standards." I nodded slowly, not immediately concerned. "I understand. I've been reading the HOA rules from the welcome packet. I'm sure my garden's going to comply." She offered a thin-lipped grin. "Excellent. We're proud of Maple Blossom Estate's immaculate lawns and uniform aesthetic. So if you have questions, do let me know." She paused, eyes raking over my half-unpacked moving boxes on the porch. "And do be sure not to leave cardboard boxes out for more than a day or two. We have a policy to avoid curbside clutter." Even at that moment, I sensed a faint tension behind her words, as though she was itching to find any small transgression. But I chalked it up to typical HOA fussiness. Before she left, she extended a manicured hand, her handshake brisk. "Welcome to Maple Blossom Estates, Mr. Shepard. I trust you'll keep our community as pristine as you found it." With that, she turned and strode away, clipboard at the ready, scanning my neighbors' houses for her next target. I watched her go, an uneasy feeling in my stomach, but I shook it off. If a slight sense of being judged was the biggest price for living in such a scenic neighborhood, it seemed worthwhile. Over the following weeks, I poured my heart into landscaping my property. I'd grown up in the countryside, where my grandmother had taught me the joys of cultivating vegetables, fruit trees, and vibrant flower beds. With Maple Blossom Estates, I finally had the chance to replicate a piece of that rural Eden in my own backyard. Out front, I stuck to simpler decor, flower beds edging the walkway, a few shrubs for structure, maybe a fountain at some point. But in the backyard, that was my personal haven. I had big plans for a combination orchard and vegetable garden. I'd already begun building raised beds for tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and squash. At the perimeter, I planted dwarf fruit trees, peach, apple, and pear. In one corner, I installed a trellis for climbing beans and sweet peas. Another corner was reserved for a compost bin, hidden by a neat row of cypress trees. I was conscious of the HOA's rules. The guidelines talked about acceptable plant heights, visible uniformity, and approved color palettes for fences and garden structures. Some might find them restrictive, but I reasoned that nothing in my intended garden violated those specifics. The yard was behind a tall fence anyway. From the street, you'd only see the tips of fruit trees. More than once, neighbors strolled by and complimented my budding orchard. A friendly older gentleman named Terry remarked, "Wow, that's going to be some harvest next year. Karen might fuss about it, but keep going. It looks awesome." His mention of Karen, the moniker for Bryony, made me curious. "What's the deal with her exactly?" I asked. Terry shrugged. "She's the self-appointed police of Maple Blossom. Some folks say she loves controlling everything, especially if you outshine her yard. Just watch her back." I thanked Terry for the heads up. It was ironic. My job involved coordinating state-level responses to hurricanes, wildfires, floods, and other disasters. Yet here I was, worried about how one suburban HOA lady might respond to a vegetable patch. Sure enough, tensions began to surface. One afternoon, a typed note on official HOA letterhead appeared on my door. "Mr. Shepard, we kindly request that you submit detailed plans for any orchard or vegetable garden expansions in accordance with Maple Blossom Estates landscaping review. Please describe all intended plant varieties, expected height, and any potential impact on neighbors' views. Signed, B. Adler **. I was slightly taken aback, as I'd never seen such a requirement spelled out in the community's guidelines. But to stay on good terms, I drafted a response. A quick list of the fruit trees, max height, 8 to 10 feet, dwarf varieties. The raised vegetable beds, none exceeding 3 feet in height. A note that these were strictly for personal use, not for commercial purposes. I emailed it to the HOA's official address. Days passed, and I heard nothing. Meanwhile, neighbors told me that Karen had been grumbling about my oversized produce ambition, claiming it might attract pests or disrupt the neighborhood's uniform look. It seemed laughable. The orchard was perfectly tidy and behind a fence. The only pests were the usual squirrels, which every yard had anyway. At the next HOA meeting, my first since moving in, I arrived to see Karen sitting at the head of the table, flanked by 3 other board members. She launched into a prepared statement about unapproved expansions. My orchard was singled out as a potential threat to property values, though she couldn't cite a specific rule. Thankfully, 2 of the board members were more even-keeled. They asked me questions about orchard size, pollinators, and so on. Satisfied by my answers, they voted to let me keep going, as no clear rule was being violated. Karen cast a dissenting vote, but was overruled. I walked home that night relieved, though a flicker of worry danced in my gut. Karen's glare across the table suggested this was far from over. Life continued without major incident. My orchard blossomed. Each morning before work, I'd check on my peppers, carefully water the young fruit trees, and step into the day feeling grounded by nature's tranquility. Meanwhile, at the office, I oversaw the State Disaster Management Agency, an intense role involving coordination with local governments, readiness for floods, storms, and other large-scale crises. It was ironic how my professional life was all about dealing with catastrophes, yet the biggest personal stress was a meddling neighbor. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a scorching July afternoon, the heat index pushing triple digits. My phone buzzed around lunchtime with an unfamiliar number. I answered, and a frantic neighbor's voice erupted. "Mr. Shepard, get home quick. There's water everywhere." The line crackled. Words like flood, gushing from the street, somebody tampered with the main, hammered into my brain. My instincts as a disaster manager kicked in. Without hesitation, I grabbed my gear and left the office, ignoring my staff's surprised looks as I peeled out of the parking lot. If a water main had burst near my house, it could mean major property damage, or worse, potential sinkholes, hazards, contaminated water supply. But as I sped toward Maple Blossom Estates, a swirl of dread overcame me. The neighbor had also said, "I think it started near your property. The water's headed straight for your garden." That seemed more than coincidence. Could it be sabotage? I shook my head, not wanting to believe anyone would be that reckless. But the moment I turned onto my street, I saw the nightmare unfolding. It was chaos. Streams of water poured across the asphalt, pooling in driveways and lawns. Several houses had water lapping at their garages. Some folks stood on their porches, anxiously watching the creeping flood. A few others waded in knee-deep water near the intersection, desperately trying to divert the flow with sandbags and boards. When I pulled up to my driveway, I gaped. My once pristine front yard was submerged. The water poured in from a gushing torrent near the curb, where a hydrant, or rather, a main line beneath it, seemed to have ruptured. The pressure was enormous. A fountain of water blasted upward, arching over the sidewalk and splashing onto my property. My carefully planted flower beds bobbed in the current. At the side of my house, I heard terrified barking. My golden retriever, Ripley, was inside, safe, but the neighbor's dog was stranded in a partially fenced yard. I sprinted over, coaxed the poor pup to a safer area, then scrambled back to my own yard to see if the orchard was salvageable. The backyard, beyond the gate, looked like a swamp. Water pooled among the raised beds. I quickly realized that if the flow didn't stop soon, the foundations of several homes, including mine, might be compromised. I flagged down a local utility worker, who was arriving with a truck and tools. "We're trying to shut off the main," he shouted over the roar. "But someone messed with the valve. It's jammed open. This is sabotage or serious vandalism, not just a normal break." The word sent a chill through me. For a second, I recalled Karen's extreme hostility. Could she possibly have? No, that was unimaginable. Or was it? Time for my professional instincts to take over. I whipped out my phone, calling my staff contact at the State Disaster Management Agency. I explained the situation, emphasizing it was a localized flood, but serious. "We need additional pumps, sandbags, and local PD or FD assistance," I said. My staffer, hearing my tone, didn't hesitate. Within minutes, I had roped in the local emergency management office. Though Maple Blossom Estates was just a neighborhood, the sabotage had turned it into a mini disaster zone. Neighbors stared, astonished, as official vehicles rolled in, fire engines, city water authority trucks, and eventually a state emergency van with portable pumps. Most recognized me as the new guy, but few knew my actual job. They watched in shock as I barked orders into radios, helping coordinate a swift response. There was no time to explain. My role gave me the clout to bypass standard red tape, and that saved precious minutes. Firefighters and utility crews located the upstream valves to cut off the water supply. Meanwhile, city workers tried to patch or close the tampered valve near my property. Water still rushed in, but slowly the flow lessened. My orchard was half underwater, my garage and basement threatened. Despite the heartbreak of seeing my beloved garden drowning, I forced myself to remain calm. My training had taught me that emotional meltdown helps no one. As hours passed, the water level stabilized, then started to recede. By late afternoon, the crisis was mostly contained, though knee-deep puddles lingered in many places. Soggy lawns, damaged cars, and soaked patios littered the scene. The entire neighborhood bore the scars of a reckless sabotage. Someone had purposely forced open the main pipeline or manipulated valves to divert water to my side of the street. The question loomed, who would do such a thing? That evening, we formed an impromptu neighborhood meeting in my drenched front yard. People wore rubber boots, stepping gingerly through mud and standing in small clusters. Anger, confusion, and fear permeated the air. Some families feared their homes might now have weakened foundations. Others were furious about ruined gardens, destroyed belongings in garages, or waterlogged vehicles. I tried to keep them calm, explaining the city had shut the main off, repairs were underway, and insurance claims would be a next step. The local police chief, who had come to assist, spoke grimly. "This was not an accident. We suspect vandalism or sabotage. We found tamper marks on multiple valves. We'll investigate thoroughly." Rumors swirled about who could have orchestrated such a destructive act. Many neighbors whispered Bryony Adler's name, Karen. They recalled her fierce dislike for anything that disrupted her vision of uniform yards. She'd once threatened to have a neighbor's statue forcibly removed. Another neighbor said she'd threatened massive fines for a harmless backyard greenhouse. Could it be that she'd stooped to vandalizing city infrastructure to ruin my orchard? I was hesitant to jump to conclusions, but the evidence piled up. The sabotage so specifically targeted the water supply near my property line. Another neighbor, Ms. Caldwell, mentioned seeing Karen's car idling by the water main on the corner that morning, an unusual time for her to be out, especially given the heat. Another claimed Karen had ranted about making sure that orchard never sets a precedent for other insane landscaping ideas. The police made note of these statements, nodding gravely. As the meeting concluded, Karen herself was conspicuously absent. Or so I thought. Someone said they'd spotted her earlier, storming out of her house in a flurry, only to vanish. That further fueled suspicion. But I needed proof, real proof. And if it was indeed Karen, she had no idea she'd picked a fight with the state's top disaster management official, someone well-versed in investigating and recovering from crises. I vowed to see justice done for the neighbors who'd lost so much in this flood. Over the next few days, I split my time between leading relief efforts in Maple Blossom Estates and performing my usual duties for the state. The city water department worked around the clock to replace damaged pipes, restore clean water, and check for cross-contamination. Insurance adjusters descended on the neighborhood, taking countless photos of water-damaged properties. Anger simmered as residents realized the financial toll, from water-ruined carpets to mold concerns in basements. My orchard was a soggy mess. The newly planted trees stood in standing water for nearly 24 hours, and I feared many wouldn't survive. The vegetables and raised beds were battered, many uprooted by rushing water. I tried to salvage what I could, drying out topsoil, propping up drooping plants. Some neighbors pitched in with shovels, piling up mud away from the foundation of my house. Their generosity gave me hope that Maple Blossom Estates could recover. Meanwhile, the police investigation advanced quickly. They'd confirmed forced manipulation of multiple underground water valves near my street. Tool marks indicated someone had wrenched them open in a specific sequence, directing the maximum possible flow down my block. The question was how they gained access, city keys or specialized tools. Possibly they used a black market valve key, or maybe they had a contact in the city works department. Or perhaps there was a simpler explanation. In that swirl of confusion, my phone rang late one night. It was Detective Rios from the local PD. Mr. Shepard, we have strong evidence linking Ms. Adler to the sabotage. We just need a bit more to build a rock-solid case. If you come across anything, call me right away. I swallowed hard. So it was official. Unless something shifted drastically, it seemed Karen was indeed behind the entire fiasco. As I walked my dog Ripley through the damp streets early one morning, I spotted Karen lurking near a neighbor's yard. She wore a visor and carried her ever-present clipboard, as though on official HOA business. My pulse quickened at the sight of her, fury flaring in my chest. For a moment, I considered confronting her publicly. But a calmer instinct prevailed. I needed proof and a methodical approach. My daily work taught me to let law enforcement handle such matters. However, Karen apparently had a different plan. Seeing me approach, she marched over, her expression a mix of indignation and false concern. "Mr. Shepard," she said, voice trembling with an edge of anger. "I hear you're spreading rumors that I sabotaged the water main. That's a terrible accusation." My jaw tightened. "I'm not spreading rumors, Ms. Adler. The police are investigating. There's evidence someone tampered with the valves, and multiple witnesses place you in the area." She huffed, feigning shock. "I was simply checking on a potential leak for the HOA. Don't you see how convenient it is for you to blame me? You're the one who stands to gain sympathy for your orchard. Maybe you orchestrated it yourself." I almost laughed at the absurdity, but anger simmered instead. "Gain sympathy? You realize half the neighborhood got flooded? People's homes, cars, valuables destroyed. Are you accusing me of flooding my own property to gain an advantage in, what, an orchard dispute?" Her gaze flickered, but she held firm. "You probably wanted the state to pay for some massive landscaping redesign. Don't try to pin this on me." We stood there, tension crackling in the air. Neighbors across the street paused to watch, phone cameras discreetly raised. Finally, I took a measured breath. "If you're innocent, you'll have nothing to fear from the police investigation. But do not try to twist this, Karen. The real culprit will be held accountable. I'll make sure of that." She pressed her lips together, turned sharply, and stomped off. As she retreated, I felt a chill. Even with the damning evidence, Karen was brazenly denying everything. I wondered if she might escalate matters further or attempt to frame me. The sense that a more severe confrontation loomed weighed on me heavily. Detective Rios called me to the station a few days later to go over new details. The city had security cameras at certain intersections, capturing partial glimpses of cars passing by at suspicious times. One car matching Karen's license plate was indeed recorded near the main water valve at 5:34 a.m., the day of the sabotage, though the footage was somewhat grainy. She also had been observed purchasing an industrial valve key online. Records from an e-commerce site indicated a sale to B. Adler a few weeks prior. She claims it was for a backyard sprinkler repair, Rio said with a wry smile. But that's a specialized city-grade tool, not typically used for homeowner sprinklers. It seemed everything pointed to Karen, yet building a conclusive, airtight case took time. The DA's office wanted to ensure no technicalities allowed her to wiggle free. In the meantime, Maple Blossom Estates remained partially traumatized by the flood. Many residents vocally demanded Karen's immediate expulsion from the HOA board. Others worried about retaliation if they spoke out. For me, the damage to my orchard was incalculable emotionally. Those young trees I'd nurtured had root rot or leaf wilt. The vegetables mostly drowned. One silver lining: some of the orchard might recover if I pruned carefully and let the soil dry. Nevertheless, it was heartbreaking to see so much ruined potential. Balancing my personal heartbreak with the bigger community's crisis, I used my professional knowledge of disaster relief to help neighbors navigate insurance claims, set up temporary sump pumps, and coordinate with city engineers to check for sinkholes. If Karen intended to break me by flooding the orchard, her plan ironically backfired. I was perhaps the best-equipped person in the state to handle flooding. But the question lingered: why would she go so far? Was it pure spite, or something deeper? A surprising tip came from an elderly neighbor, Mrs. O'Donnell. She'd lived in Maple Blossom Estates since its inception and knew all the gossip. She visited me one evening, carrying a plate of cookies. After offering condolences for my wrecked garden, she whispered, "I think Karen hated your orchard because she was worried it would overshadow her own yard designs." I raised an eyebrow. Her yard designs? Mrs. O'Donnell nodded. Bryony, Karen, enters these fancy horticulture competitions. She's known for her immaculate rose garden. She's always bragging about how Maple Blossom Estates is her canvas. That orchard of yours threatened her status, so she needed it gone. It sounded petty and borderline insane. But as I thought about it, a pattern emerged. Karen's spotless yard, her rigid enforcement of uniformity, her meltdown at the idea of me having a flourishing orchard that might outshine her rose garden. All of it fit. The sabotage, while unbelievably reckless, might stem from her twisted quest to remain the neighborhood's horticulture queen. No matter the motive, her malicious act had wrought severe consequences. She'd threatened lives, destroyed property, and caused tens of thousands of dollars in damages. People lost cherished heirlooms in flooded basements. Some pets nearly drowned. If she thought it would just drown my orchard quietly, she vastly underestimated the scale and my capabilities. Given the magnitude of the damage and my position, I requested the state attorney general's office review the case. After all, tampering with municipal infrastructure is a serious felony, far beyond local vandalism. The AG's office was more than willing to back the local DA if charges were brought. Meanwhile, my own connections in disaster management meant I had access to forensic experts who specialized in sabotage of critical utilities. Together with the city's investigators, we established a clear timeline. Karen purchased the valve key, online records. She was seen driving near the main valves the morning of the flood, security footage. Tool marks matched the model of key she bought. Text messages from her phone to a friend, subpoenaed, hinted at teaching that orchard man a lesson. It was an ironclad case building up. The local PD told me they'd likely make an arrest soon. Still, each day that passed without resolution weighed on me. She was still out there, stalking the neighborhood, presumably plotting her defense or next move. At the same time, Maple Blossom Estate's daily life slowly resumed. People dried out their garages, replaced ruined appliances, reseeded their lawns. I resumed my orchard rescue, draining water, applying soil amendments, hoping to salvage at least half the saplings. One evening, out by the orchard, I found a piece of the broken water valve jammed into the fence, chilling evidence of how close the sabotage was to my property line. I told myself justice was coming. I reminded neighbors that the system was working. But patience wore thin. We wanted closure. The sun had barely risen one August morning when I noticed police cruisers rolling quietly into Maple Blossom Estates. They parked outside Karen's address. Word traveled fast. Neighbors peered out windows, watching a small group of officers approach her home. Within minutes, the sound of a firm knock echoed. At first, no response. Then the front door opened. Karen stood there, hair disheveled, a robe clutched around her. A tense standoff of words presumably followed. I watched from a distance, heart pounding. Finally, the officers guided her out, handcuffs glinting in the early sunlight. She was put into the back of a cruiser. A hush fell across the neighborhood. Some folks gasped, others whispered. A few might have felt pity, but many were relieved. The woman who caused such havoc was being held accountable. By mid-morning, the local news trucks arrived, drawn by the sensational headline: HOA board member accused of flood sabotage. They interviewed shocked residents who expressed rage and sorrow over the destruction. They also learned about my role in organizing rescue efforts. The coverage painted Karen as a villain who took HOA zealotry to a criminal extreme. I tried to stay out of the spotlight, politely declining extensive interviews. My primary focus was ensuring Maple Blossom Estates recovered fully. But inevitably, the story of flood sabotage and the orchard became a top local headline for weeks. The public was both horrified and fascinated that a neighborly dispute could lead to such reckless sabotage. After Karen's arrest, formal charges were filed: felony vandalism of public utilities, reckless endangerment, property destruction, and more. She posted bail, but strict conditions barred her from approaching Maple Blossom Estates or communicating with residents, including me. That offered a measure of relief, though it felt eerie not seeing her patrolling the sidewalks. Her defense attorney argued she was misunderstood, that the evidence was circumstantial, but the mounting proof was too damning. The city, the state attorney general, and dozens of victimized neighbors united in demanding accountability. Pretrial motions dragged on for months. Karen's lawyer tried to spin conspiracies, insinuating that I orchestrated the flood to smear her name. This notion was ludicrous. Why would I flood my own property and damage half the neighborhood? But legal theatrics can be bizarre. Ultimately, the judge dismissed her conspiracy claims for lack of any credible evidence. Throughout it all, I continued my normal life, leading the state disaster management agency, helping with routine floods or hurricane readiness. In a twist of irony, each time I oversaw the response to a real flood event, I was reminded of the small-scale version inflicted upon my neighborhood. My orchard started to recover, albeit slowly. I replaced some drowned saplings and diligently nurtured survivors. Neighbors often shared how Karen's sabotage had ironically drawn them together. People who never spoke were now friends, having bonded over the crisis. They pitched in on each other's repairs, exchanged advice about water damage, and collectively ensured no corner of Maple Blossom Estates was left behind in the restoration. Finally, the trial date arrived. It was the culmination of a saga that had spanned months, turning Maple Blossom Estates from a quiet suburb into a local media hotspot. I received a subpoena as a witness, given my orchard was a prime target, and I had been pivotal in coordinating the emergency response. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Karen sat at the defense table, hair neatly styled, face set in a stony expression. She refused to meet my eyes when I took the stand. The prosecution laid out the timeline, the evidence of her online tool purchase, the security footage, the text messages referencing teaching a lesson. They highlighted the severe consequences: tens of thousands of dollars in property damage, displacement for some families, and risk to life from potential electrocution or structural collapse. Karen's defense tried to paint her as a well-meaning HOA member who discovered a leak and panicked, but the forensic data about forced valves was irrefutable. Eventually, the jury deliberated. The verdict came back: guilty on the main felony count of tampering with municipal infrastructure, plus lesser charges. Karen's face went pale. She stared straight ahead, as though in shock. The judge scheduled a separate sentencing date. The maximum penalty could be years in prison. Many neighbors felt that was only fair, given the scale of her destructive act. I felt no glee, just relief that justice prevailed. No matter what Karen's sentence turned out to be, Maple Blossom Estates could finally move forward. With the legal proceedings concluding, the aftermath required emotional and financial healing. Insurance covered some damages, but not all. The city and state allocated emergency funds, thanks in part to my push, to help with road repairs and infrastructure improvements. As a volunteer effort, I organized a replant and restore day, inviting horticulture enthusiasts from around the county to help re-landscape damaged yards. The turnout was astounding. People came from various backgrounds, bringing truckloads of mulch, saplings, flowers, and building materials. Over one weekend, we filled dumpsters with flood debris, replaced ruined topsoil, and revived battered lawns. Families who once barely greeted each other now worked side by side, forging new friendships. Meanwhile, my orchard rebounded better than expected. Some of the dwarf fruit trees had drowned, but about half clung to life. I replaced the lost ones with fresh saplings donated by local nurseries sympathetic to our plight. The raised vegetable beds were rebuilt, this time with improved drainage. The sense of resurrecting that orchard from watery ruin was symbolic of Maple Blossom Estate's resilience. At the end of the replant and restore weekend, we held a small celebration. Neighbors gathered at the local park, sharing homemade dishes. Children played gleefully on the grass that had once been soaked with floodwater. Someone proposed a toast to second chances and to a neighborhood that overcame sabotage with solidarity. As I looked around at relieved, smiling faces, I felt a profound gratitude. The crisis, though painful, had ultimately led to a deeper sense of community. When Karen's sentencing date arrived, I had mixed feelings. Part of me believed she deserved significant jail time for endangering so many lives and properties. Another part felt pity for the pettiness that fueled her sabotage. The judge handed down a prison sentence of 3 years, plus restitution payments to affected residents, collectively amounting to tens of thousands of dollars. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. 3 years is substantial for a suburban HOA dispute gone rogue, but the sabotage was no small matter. During the hearing, Karen's lawyer requested leniency, citing mental health issues and stress. The judge acknowledged that but emphasized the severity of her actions. She left the courtroom in handcuffs, tears in her eyes. I watched quietly, reflecting on how a petty vendetta escalated into a life-altering crime. In the aftermath, the Maple Blossom Estates HOA reorganized. New, more rational members took the helm. The community amended its bylaws to reduce the likelihood of any single individual wielding so much power. They even included a provision that all major landscaping or property disputes must be handled through a transparent, consensus-driven process, never letting one Karen sabotage the neighborhood again. Though she was physically absent, Karen's name lingered like a cautionary tale, an extreme example of how obsession with control can morph into outright destruction. A year passed since the flood. The orchard thrived. Some trees grew robust, bearing their first small harvest of apples and peaches. Each time I plucked a ripe fruit, I thought about the tumult that orchard had inspired. Yet the sweet taste of success, literally and figuratively, overshadowed the painful memories. Maple Blossom Estates reclaimed its reputation as a beautiful, close-knit neighborhood. Sure, the houses might still look uniform from the outside, but a new openness reigned among neighbors. People felt freer to express their gardening creativity. Some were inspired by my orchard to plant herb gardens or small berry patches. The new HOA leadership gently guided residents on best practices rather than micromanaging or threatening fines. Occasionally, I'd be out front watering the flower beds, and passers-by would stop to chat about the orchard or the community's new vibe. Terry, that older gentleman who first warned me about Karen, said, "You know, it's a shame what happened, but I think we're stronger for it. Maybe we owe that orchard of yours a big thank you." We shared a laugh. In my professional world, word spread that I'd used my disaster management expertise in my own backyard. Colleagues teased me about being the best person to handle a sabotage flood. Indeed, the entire fiasco underscored how crises can strike anywhere, even in quiet suburbs, and how readiness and community spirit are crucial. One crisp autumn weekend, Maple Blossom Estates hosted a neighborhood block party, part of our annual tradition. We strung up lights, set out tables of potluck dishes, and opened our backyards for a casual garden walk. I invited neighbors to see my revitalized orchard. Under a gentle fall sun, we strolled among the dwarf trees, sampling fresh apples, marveling at how the orchard had bounced back from the flood. Kids giggled as they discovered ladybugs on the leaves, and adults snapped photos of the still-growing fruit. I felt a surge of contentment. A year ago, water had surged here with destructive force, courtesy of one embittered HOA extremist. Now, the orchard symbolized rebirth and unity. And I, the state's disaster management director, had found a home that tested my skills but ultimately reaffirmed my faith in community resilience. At the block party, I made a short speech, raising a glass of cider, pressed from apples grown in my orchard. Here's to Maple Blossom Estates, to neighbors who pull together, to second chances for battered yards, and to the knowledge that we can overcome any disaster if we stand as one. Applause and cheers broke out. No mention was made of Karen's name. Her destructive legacy was overshadowed by the positivity that followed. The harvest that day was more than just fruit. It was the sweet reward of perseverance, compassion, and justice served. We had turned a man-made flood into an opportunity for growth, forging a stronger neighborhood bond, and proving that no sabotage can triumph over united hearts.